Welcome to the workshop. In today's episode, we're diving deep into the captivating world of 3D modeling in virtual reality. Let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is turn on angle snap, turn on mirror, and start blocking in some of the main basic shapes. We're going to increase the resolution, going to block in probably like the first part, which is the nose cone. I keep this process pretty loose, just trying to get the main volume of the model kind of built up. As you can see here, now I'm starting to, what I like to call, I guess, bevel or erase some of the extra stuff that we sculpted on, and that just helps make things look more mechanical or hard surface, less organic, which is our ultimate goal with making a spaceship or robot or whatever. I carved out a little section for the seat, block out. I wanted it to be a little bit bigger, so I take the move tool, I sort of exaggerate different sections, trying to get the right proportions for our block out. Continuing to erase the pieces and make flat surfaces. This blockout phase can really take as long as you want, but important to make sure that the main proportions are set before you start detailing. And I'm pretty happy with where this is as we can see it, so I'm going to make a new layer and start blocking in some of the other more mechanical pieces. One great tip during this process is you don't want everything to be hyper detailed. You would rather maybe 30% of the model be detailed and the rest be flat panels, which makes this process a lot easier. And what I mean by that is the eye really gets exhausted by looking at details. So detailing every inch of your model is not a good idea. You need parts so that the eyes can rest. So really a 2/3 rule is pretty good, which means 2/3 of your model should not be very detailed and should have large sections of just flat color or panels or whatever. So here I am kit bashing, which is one of my favorite parts of this whole process and really sort of where the model starts to come together. I use a combination of mechanical stamps and custom stamps in medium to sort of start detailing out what I like to call the engine pieces, different parts that aren't the main body work. This is such a cool workflow because the spaceships from a long time ago made for Star Wars were made in this process, just a more physical means. They would take model kit pieces and bash them or glue them onto a base, and that's how some of the best spaceships ever were designed. So I go through this process, and it's really just sort of about seeing what you like and what looks good, where you think actual like pieces that would make sense. I added some jet engines, trying to kind of detail parts of where things sort of connect. So I'm thinking maybe a windscreen would connect to this part. Just a little bit of hints of detail, break up some of these main massive shapes. You don't want to detail the whole shape, but just a little bit here and there can go a long way. Making everything in different layers and having those layers differentiated by color really helps a lot. And also just to make sure that you don't have something that just is a gray blob that you can't differentiate. So it's important to establish different colors as you're detailing. Having multiple layers will be great once we get into substance and we're able to quickly change materials for each of the parts. Here I am adding the little windscreen, just experimenting with what looks good, kind of back up the model, look at it, does this look okay? Try to add little pieces to sort of connect it more to the shape, kind of cut out the parts I don't like. The little windscreen kind of looks cool, although I don't know how effective it would actually be. I cut out a little hole right here. Looking at my ref, the door kind of had like a bit chopped out of it. So I thought that would be kind of cool to add a little bit more detailing to this section, like maybe they're sitting underneath like an engine or something. And so I kind of go through the process of trying to line these up as best I can, making it look like engine exhausts or some cylinders or something like that, like engine cylinders, adding little engine parts and components. This is all just the default mechanical stamps at this point, and kind of go through and sort of clean things up or edge things up. Parts I don't like, making new shapes. This felt like it was so disconnected from the rest of it that I kind of added bits to make it feel more connected. Make a new layer and I start adding bits for the seat and the cockpit, which was really fun and actually came together quite quickly, and it looks really good. I come in here and I was like, well, where are they gonna put his feet? So I cut out a little hole for the feet. Wasn't really satisfied with the nose, but just taking a step back, looking at it, checking out different parts, experimenting, pretty close to the end. So that's it. That was the whole modeling process. It only took me 49 minutes to do that whole thing. So it was very quick, very easy to work in VR. So once you export from Medium, you're going to want to export as an FBX, and you're going to import that into Blender. Once it's imported into Blender, you can assign materials to each of the parts that we sculpted in Medium. One thing that I did do was I was unhappy with the proportions in Medium, so I just scaled everything on the x-axis. And I'm going to go through each one of the layers, rename it, so this is the body, and change the color and assign a new material to each of the parts. So the windscreen, engine parts, I have the seat, the jets, everything. So once we have everything imported into Substance, we're going to bake our mesh map. So you go to the texture set settings, turn off ID, you're not going to need ID, choose your output size, I'm doing this at 2K, and just let all the textures bake. This baking process is usually pretty quick depending on your computer, how many layers you have, and what resolution you set this at. So when we're back in painting mode, we're going to start off with some smart materials to set as our base. Now, really, this is sort of a concept, so I'm not going to go too in-depth with the texturing process because it can take a long time. But my process for these is usually just to experiment, to check out different smart materials, see how they look. And some materials work better than others from Medium to Substance. The unwrapping process isn't always that great, and so some of the smart materials don't look so good. So I'm just assigning, okay, well, this is a basic leather texture, let's put that on the seat. Let's try out some of these painted steel textures. That doesn't look so good, but that one kind of looks cool. Steel dark, so we're just kind of go with it, just kind of play around, and I'll go into each of the smart materials, change some of those settings, some of the colors, different opacities of the layers, and see what looks good. So I'm going to change this one to be sort of a bluish metal underneath with like a greenish paint on top. some of the engine pieces. Originally wanted to have a pink bike, but you know, just playing around. I mean, this looks pretty cool with green. I could have went that direction. I didn't want something too grungy. Feels like everything is super grungy. So eventually I ended up with this machinery, plastic glossy. It looks really cool, so just changed the colors up a little bit. So I went with more of a red color. And turned down a lot of the dust and the stain, just changing the opacity of those layers so it's really subtle, it's not overdone. So when we're done in Substance, we go into Blender and we import the textures that we exported from Substance into each one of our materials. So I start off with the body, and I just go through each one of them and assign the base color, the roughness, and the normal maps. And it's a tedious process to make all these layers, but as you can see here, I had a problem with the normal maps, and to fix that, you just switch your normal map to object space and then turn down the strength. For some reason, Substance doesn't always make each one of the textures that you export look quite correct. So my roughness and my metallic maps are usually not, they're usually a little bit too overdone, and I have to kind of bring it back down a little bit once I'm in Blender. One good way to do that is with a color ramp node in between your texture and the principled BSDF. That can kind of help you control the different aspects, and I just sort of go through and assign each one of them its proper textures, and it's a long process, but completely worth it once you get your model done. It is so cool to watch your model sort of come to life through this process, and you want to make sure that you switch it to object space for your normal map and turn down the strength just a little bit, and it'll make it look a lot better. So this is me making the glass material. I switch the settings to alpha blend. I turn off the shadows, and I turned up the transmission and turned down the alpha. Then I turned up the specular and changed the roughness and metallic. And that gives us a nice transparent material. Kind of adjusting the scale on this a little bit. I noticed when I changed the scale, it made my jet thrusters look kind of like squished. And so this is me trying to fix that. I just isolate each of the sections and separate them and sort of move them back into place by hand. And it just took a little fiddling, but eventually I got it to look pretty good. Put an HDRI in to check the texture, see if it looks good. Switch it to cycles and sort of marvel at it. It looks really cool. Add a sun lamp, change different properties of the lighting. I could fiddle with lighting all day, but I'm just playing around the lighting so that I can check the material, see if it looks, you know, good, and kind of think about how I want to do the render. So add a couple of area lights to sort of change different highlights of the model. There's a small area light to kind of have a little bit of a kick on the top. And this is me. I'm going ahead and make the control panel. So I just start with a basic cube, kind of put it where I want to kind of line it up. This is a very quick and dirty control panel modeling process. So I'm going to bevel these edges. I'm going to create a new material. I'm going to import in a control panel texture and then cube project to unwrap. Select each of the faces, go into my UV editing mode. I'm going to kind of scale this down a little bit. Select parts of the texture that I'd like to be part of the control panel. kind of just sort of put this stuff where it kind of looks like it would go. And sort of put this over here. Doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, for a lot of this stuff, I mean, if they're looking at this part of your model, you know, they have bigger problems to worry about. It's probably a bad model. But you know, you want to make sure your details sort of make sense. And so I'm just sort of adding this control panel as there's got to be something here, you know. And I'm going to go ahead and make loop cuts, sort of make this a little bit less flat, I would say. Kind of indent each one of these screens. I'm doing it very quickly. I just don't care that much. It's all just gonna, you know, blend in with the model anyway. So I select each one of these faces, and I'm going to extrude along normals and push it inside a little bit, just to give it a little bit more depth. And then I was like, well, little control panel kind of could have like these extra side bits, but I didn't want it to look too duplicated, so I just mirrored it, and it looks a little bit better. And so I realized that I don't know how they're gonna pilot this thing without like a steering wheel. I could have made one in VR, but I could also just do it in Blender as well. It's not that hard to make a steering wheel. So add just a cube, and I start modeling it and realize that mirror modifier is great. So here I go, I'm just extruding, scaling, extruding, scaling, extrude, scale, and there you go. You have a little bit of like a yoke, I would say. You know, like one of those Teslas that have like the yoke steering wheels. Add a subdivision surface modifier and cube project, and bring in some sort of like metal paneling texture, and just sort of start assigning each one of the faces to a place that looks kind of logical. Just different parts, different places. So that goes there, this goes there, over here. And the yoke, kind of put it like that. I think that looks pretty cool. Kind of make that more like this. Really, no one's going to be really looking in depth at this part, so it just sort of needs to be there. And then I auto smooth, turn down the subdivision surface, and I'm like, well, that's pretty good. Make it a little bit bigger. Doesn't have to be perfect. No, especially if we're just doing a model for fun or for show, or just to do a render for Instagram. Like, no one's gonna see underneath the steering wheel, you know what I mean? So get it done is, you know, don't get bogged down with a lot of the details, just get it done. And that looks pretty good. And it just adds a little bit more to the cockpit. And so that is about it for this model. I'm gonna do a little bit of stuff for rendering. I'm gonna add a plane, add a ground texture that I have, that I downloaded who knows when. I go through the process of kind of looking at what it would look like in an environment. You know, could help out a lot just to sort of see the object in the context of its environment. And yeah, pretty happy with how this turned out. It looks really cool. I am very pleased. And so this is the final render. Now that we're done, I would just like to thank you for watching this and joining me on the workshop. I hope to do more of these just quick concept sketches in VR. Stay tuned for that. Keep exploring. Until next time, keep crafting these digital wonders. It's awesome.